Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're diving into some really fascinating history today. The Nation of Islam.
The NOI.
Yeah, the NOI. It's a movement that's, well, I think it's safe to say, really controversial.
Definitely stirred the pot.
Yeah, but also incredibly impactful, especially for Black empowerment.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is how they actually put their ideas into action, especially when it came to economic empowerment. You know, they weren't just talking the talk.
Right, they walk the walk. Big time. And that's what we're going to get into today using a podcast episode called...
Oh, yeah, the Mr. Hutchings History podcast. That was great.
It is. The episode is titled The Achievements and Challenges of the Nation of Islam. Really gets into the heart of it all.
It's a fantastic episode. Gets into how they made such a huge impact, but also, like you said, sparked so much controversy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to understand the NOI, we got to go back to the beginning. Back to the 1930s, during the Depression.
Think about it. Northern ghettos. Limited opportunities for Black Americans, just this deep desire for change in the air.
And that's where the NOI emerges.
Right. Founded in 1930 by Wallace Fard Muhammad, but they really take off under Elijah Muhammad's leadership starting in 1934.
Elijah Muhammad. Yeah, he is a key figure here. And they offered something different, a different path to empowerment than a lot of other folks were talking about.
Exactly. A very different path. They emphasized Black pride, self-sufficiency, and, well, this is the big one, separatism.
Separatism, right. A big contrast to what figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and groups like the NAACP were advocating for.
Think about it. King was all about integration, right? Breaking down those walls of segregation, bringing Black Americans into the existing social fabric.
Yeah, making America live up to its ideals of equality for all.
Right, exactly. But the NOI saw that as, well, kind of playing by the rules of a system that was rigged against them from the start.
So they wanted to create something entirely separate.
In a way, yes. They called for either a return to Africa or establishing a separate Black nation within the U.S. It was a bold vision, a real rejection of the status quo.
And it resonated with a lot of people, especially those who were frustrated with the slow pace of change, the lack of real progress.
It gave them a sense of hope, a sense of agency, like they could control their own destiny. But, as you can imagine, this put them at odds with a lot of the major players in the civil rights movement.
Okay, so we're seeing how the NOI's ideology was really different, even radical for its time. But beyond the ideology, what did they actually do? What did they achieve?
Well, that's where it gets really fascinating. The NOI put their ideas into action. They weren't just talking about self-sufficiency, they were building it.
You mean with their businesses?
Exactly. They created this incredible network of Black-owned businesses, restaurants, bakeries, grocery stores, you name it. They were building a parallel economy within Black neighborhoods.
Wow, a whole parallel economy. That's pretty remarkable.
It was. They provided jobs, fostered entrepreneurship, instilled this real sense of ownership and pride.
So it wasn't just about making money, it was about building something bigger.
Absolutely. It was about economic autonomy, showing that Black communities didn't have to rely on white-controlled institutions for their well-being.
That's really powerful, challenging the whole system from within.
Exactly. Confronting racism and economic exploitation head-on. Their message was, Black people can build their own institutions, control their own resources, create a better future for themselves, independent of the white establishment.
And that must have resonated so deeply with people, especially in those northern cities where opportunities were limited and discrimination was, everywhere.
It was a beacon of hope, a path to empowerment, a real alternative.
Yeah, it gave people a sense of control over their lives, their destinies, a way to fight back against a system that felt stacked against them.
And while the NOI's separatist views were definitely controversial, those economic achievements, that tangible success, well, it provided a real-world example of what Black communities could accomplish when they worked together.
Right, and it wasn't just about the economic side, was it? The NOI also had this really strong emphasis on personal transformation, self-discipline.
Absolutely. Clean living, they called it. No alcohol, no drugs, strong family values, strict moral code. It was about building up the individual, and through that, uplifting the community as a whole.
And that message, while maybe strict for some, probably held a lot of appeal, especially in communities facing so many challenges.
It did. For a lot of people, it was a lifeline. A path to redemption, way to find purpose and stability in a world that felt chaotic and unfair.
So we're seeing this real mix of ideas and actions with the NOI. And I think this is where things start to get even more complicated, especially when we look at the relationship with the broader civil rights movement. Yeah, the relationship with other groups in the movement, it's complicated to say the least.
To say the least. Their whole vision of Black empowerment, it was fundamentally different from the integrationist approach favored by a lot of civil rights leaders.
Right, and we've talked about the tension with folks like MLK, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around how these two approaches, integration versus separatism, how they could even exist within the same movement.
Well, you got to remember the civil rights movement, it wasn't this like perfectly unified thing. There were lots of different ideas, different strategies about how to achieve equality.
So it was more like everyone agreed on the destination, but the route to get there was up for debate.
Exactly. And for groups like the NAACP and leaders like King, the focus was on breaking down those legal barriers, you know, dismantling segregation, securing voting rights, bringing Black Americans into the existing system.
Which on the surface seems like the obvious path, right?
Wow.
Get rid of these discriminatory laws and policies, create a level playing field, but the NOI didn't see it that way.
Not at all. For them, real liberation couldn't happen within a system that was, in their view, inherently racist. They saw integration as like a form of assimilation, forcing Black people to conform to the values of a society that had oppressed them for centuries.
So for them, separatism wasn't just about physical separation. It was about rejecting the core of a society built on inequality.
Exactly. It was about creating a space for Black people to define their own destiny, build their own institutions, celebrate their own culture, free from white dominance. Now, whether that was realistic or not, that's a whole other debate.
Right. And it definitely led to some clashes within the movement, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The NOI, they didn't hold back on their criticism of other leaders, even calling folks like King Uncle Toms for their willingness to work within the system. It created a lot of division and mistrust.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because even though their methods were really different, even radical, their ultimate goal, Black empowerment, that wasn't so different from what others were fighting for, right?
Right. At the core of it, they all wanted to see Black communities thrive, achieve equality. But their ideas about how to get there, those were fundamentally different.
Okay, so we've talked about the ideology, the conflicts with other groups, but beyond economics and separatism, what kind of impact did the NOI have on Black culture and identity?
That's a great question. It's a complicated one. On one hand, you can't deny their role in fostering Black pride and self-worth. They emphasized Black history, culture, spirituality. It really helped to redefine what it meant to be Black in America.
So they were pushing back against all those negative stereotypes, the racist narratives that had been used to, put Black people down for so long.
Exactly. Reclaiming their history, celebrating their heritage, instilling a sense of dignity and self-respect. It was really powerful, especially during a time when segregation and discrimination were still so prevalent.
It sounds like they were laying the groundwork for what would become the Black Power movement.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there. Their emphasis on Black self-determination, self-defense, cultural pride, that resonated with a lot of folks who would later embrace the more militant aspects of Black power.
So while they weren't explicitly a Black Power organization, their ideas helped shape the direction of that movement.
Absolutely. They helped to shift the whole conversation about race and power, paved the way for more radical demands for change.
Now, I know the NOI's legacy is, it's complicated to say the least. We've talked about some of the controversies, but beyond those, what are some of the key takeaways, both good and bad?
Well, on the positive side, you can't ignore their impact on Black pride, economic self-sufficiency, that spiritual grounding they emphasized. It had a deep and lasting effect.
They gave people a framework for empowerment and social change that really resonated with folks who felt marginalized and excluded.
Right, exactly. And their success with those businesses, it showed that Black communities could achieve economic independence, create their own opportunity.
Well, there were downsides too, right?
Oh, of course. Their separatist ideology, some of their rhetoric, it alienated potential allies. And their criticism of other civil rights leaders, that might have hurt efforts to build broader coalitions for change.
And that focus on self-defense, while understandable given the racial violence and police brutality they faced, it also contributed to the perception that they were a militant group, potentially dangerous.
That's true. And it's important to acknowledge that some of their teachings, well, they could be interpreted as promoting hostility and intolerance. That aspect of their legacy has been really controversial.
So their story is kind of a mixed bag, full of successes and complexities. It's a reminder that even movements with good intentions can sometimes use tactics or hold beliefs that are, ultimately harmful.
It's a cautionary tale about the importance of unity, working together, inclusivity, all that, in the fight for social justice.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground here. From their beginnings during the Depression to their rise in the civil rights movement, from their economic success to those ideological controversies. It's a fascinating story.
And it's a story that still resonates today as we deal with racism, inequality, the search for a more just society. It's a story that's still unfolding in a way. It's amazing when you think about it. The NOI managed to achieve so much despite facing so much opposition and scrutiny. It's like they thrived on proving people wrong.
Yeah, they did. They really did. It's like every obstacle just made them more determined. And speaking of doubters, remember how we were talking about the mixed reactions to Elijah Muhammad's leadership? There's this detail from the podcast that I found really fascinating.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
It's about the obituaries that were published after Elijah Muhammad died in 1975. Even mainstream publications like Newsweek and the Washington Post, they had surprisingly positive things to say.
That is interesting. You wouldn't expect glowing tributes from those sources, given how controversial the NOA author was. What do they say?
Well, Newsweek called him a kind of prophetic voice, in the flowering of Black identity and pride. It acknowledged his role in shaping this movement that really empowered Black communities.
Wow. And coming from a publication like Newsweek that's significant, it suggests that even people outside the NOI recognize the impact of his message on Black consciousness and self-determination.
Yeah, exactly. And the Washington Post, which, often took a more critical view of the NOI, even they acknowledged his ability to turn, outlaws into useful, productive men and women. They recognize his role in uplifting individuals and instilling a sense of responsibility.
That's powerful. It really speaks to the transformative impact of the NOI's teachings on a personal level. That ability to instill discipline, purpose, a sense of belonging, especially for those who felt marginalized by society.
Right. It challenges that simplistic view of the NOI as just being a radical or divisive force. These obituaries show a different side, a side that focuses on their contributions to Black empowerment, self-improvement, and community building.
It reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's full of nuance and contradiction. Even figures who are widely seen as controversial can have a positive impact.
And it underscores the importance of looking beyond the headlines and really grappling with the complexities of, individual motivations and actions and legacies.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that the pursuit of social justice is rarely a straight line. It's full of internal conflicts. And the NOI story really highlights that diversity of thought and strategies within movements for change.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the Nation of Islam, what are some of the key things we want our listeners to take away?
Well, first and foremost, I think the NOI's impact on Black empowerment is undeniable. They instill this sense of pride, self-reliance, cultural awareness that continues to resonate today.
And their economic achievements, especially their success in building Black-owned businesses, it offers a powerful model for community development and economic justice.
And you can't forget their focus on self-discipline and personal responsibility. While it may have seemed strict to some, it really resonated with people who were looking for structure, purpose, a sense of belonging.
But of course, we also have to acknowledge the complexities and controversies. The separatist ideology, the sometimes inflammatory rhetoric, it created divisions and alienated potential allies.
Their relationship with other civil rights groups, their criticism of integrationist leaders like MLK, it underscores those internal debates and strategic differences that you find in any movement for social change.
Yeah, in the end, the NOI's legacy is complicated, a mix of positive and negative, but it reflects the complexities of Black empowerment and the ongoing struggle for racial justice in America.
Their story challenges us to think critically about the different paths to equality, the role of ideology and strategy in social movements, and the importance of unity and inclusivity and collaboration in the fight for a more just and equitable society.
It reminds us that history is never simple. It's messy, it's nuanced, and it's full of contradictions. But by engaging with those complexities, we can gain a deeper understanding of the past and how it shapes the present.
If there's one thing we want our listeners to take away from this, it's the importance of continued exploration and critical thinking. Don't just accept the headlines or the simplified narratives. Dig deeper, seek out diverse perspectives, and challenge your own assumptions.
The NOI's story, with all its triumphs and controversies, is a powerful reminder that understanding the past is an ongoing process, and it requires us to be open to new insights and interpretations.
So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep. There's a whole world of fascinating history out there waiting to be explored.
And that's it for our deep dive into the Nation of Islam. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit challenging. Until next time, stay curious.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.